Alright, I'm starting out at what used to be the Coliseum. I looked at these parts yesterday, and they appear to be original sections of the Coliseum that was there. It's my assumption they may have just left the sections there and built around it. Anyway, this is what is the new Coliseum now, or they're calling it the Bridge Center. This area right through here used to be a small kind of park. People would come and have picnics and so forth, and there was a tennis court down there. There wasn't any the horseshoe things then. The river had undergone a transformation there. They extended the locks from about 2 or 3 to looks like about 8 or 9. Also adding something here. It appears to be possibly some kind of new bridge to what used to be called Central Addition. And the main portion of the river ran around through here. And in the past 50 some odd years or more, that's all changed. It's pretty much back into a straight line. So I really can't tell what this thing is going to be. But maybe some kind of a outlet for the water to get out of the channels around what was Central Addition before. This area was where Ottumwa would host Ragbri. All the tents, for the most part, were put up over there. There's all kinds of play equipment, water slides, etc. So it was, for those people, it was a lot of fun. Trying to keep my hand off the telephoto. Accidentally goes that way sometimes. Chipmunks in Iowa too. I'm assuming the Indian is Chief Wapalo, but not for sure. It's the Bridge Center. The river is running pretty high right now. There's a couple of locks over by that cement or brick building over there. I think those were the only two that were original. And all of this work began about adding the retaining walls on the north side, and then this embankment on the south side of the river. Started in the mid-1950s. I remember coming over here and watching the construction of it after I would have a saxophone lesson, and that started when I was in 5th grade, I think, so it made me about 10. A lot of the buildings over there on the other side have been torn down since I was in high school. High school was the building on the kind of on the knoll up there. Now I'm going to walk back and do the route that I did about 20 years ago. And then go over to the north side of town and go take a walk through the city, or the downtown area. When I was growing up, this area next to the Coliseum had Carroll Lumber Company and a Holiday Inn, and then down closer to where the highway crosses, there was a gas station, possibly down around where that sign is now blinking. So the Coliseum, or that's what I called it back then, that's what everybody else called it, the Bridge Center, Bridge View Center. It used to be where the Coliseum was. This road work was done about the time I was in high school. this bridge right there. This is the south portion of it, south side portion of it. Was called the Viaduct, and it's had a whole lot of iterations over the years. It used to have a walking portion on both sides, and had some lights that were typical of the 1920s and 30s. My mom remembers shortly after it was completed in the early 1930s, and she talked about occasionally walking across it to get to where she lived on the south side. She lived with her sister for a while. The sound difference between this time walking and the last time walking is tremendous. There were still cars hanging around from the 70s and 80s. The last time I did this was about 1992. And the 70s and 80s cars were still around, and really loud mufflers and just junky looking from every standpoint. Now I'm on Church Street. I'm going to be coming up to the corner here of where the viaduct used to come down and meet Church Street. These overhead highways were not here then, and the viaduct came out right up here at this intersection where the lights are. The last time I did the video walk, there was a grocery store here at this corner, and now it's a Ottumwa savings bank. I remember a year or two ago, a couple of years ago, this was just a vacant lot. The old building had been torn down. It was I think a Fairview grocery store. That was always a restaurant. Now it's a something or other Mexicana, so it must be a Mexican restaurant. When I was in high school, after my junior year, I worked for a sweeper company by the name of Kirby Sweeper for a few weeks. And pretty sure it was in one of these two buildings here, or offices. And I just took Kirby sweepers apart and polished them up and put them in boxes, and somebody else put them back together with new parts. Anyway, earned me enough money to go to California. This was, there was a furniture store on the right-hand side, and the drugstore was on the left-hand side, which is still there. And I don't remember everything that was along here. Seems to me there was a bicycle shop and a jewelry store down there. There was no tattoo shops. This building had the same mansard roof on it. It was called Pedrick and Thorne hardware store. And now it's no longer a hardware store. I remember coming here a lot with my dad to get cut glass and hardware stuff. Used to go to O'Hara Hardware a lot too. That was over on the other side of the river. This is Johnson Funeral Home. Looks like it's in somewhat disrepair, or maybe they're fixing it up. I don't know. Anyway, it was at the time, it was the premier place to have your funeral. There were no tattoo shops back then, at least not out in the open. There's a chiropractic place here. So Taco John's was the location of one of the first fast food hamburger joints. It wasn't McDonald's, it was something else, but they made reasonably good hamburgers. And before that, it was a grocery store by the name. It was named United Foods, or United Grocery Store. This is Sheridan Street. It was the street that the bus went down that I always took home. I used to get my hair cut in this little shop right here. Still pretty much looks the same. Entryway is about the same. There's either 2 or 3 barber chairs in there. Another tattoo shop. Speaks to the popularity of tattoos. Doesn't speak very well for the people who get them, seeing as how they don't come off. This is the gas station. Come and go. It has been many things over the years. Many other names. I just can't remember any of them right now. So this brick building coming up down here on the right, across the street. Blonde with the glass windows down below. That was Yates Construction, and they also had Ideal Ready Mix at that time. I don't know if that's still in business anymore, but it was, can't remember the first name of the guy. What was it? Adult friend of my dad's. He and his wife went to our church occasionally. I'm going to take a little side trip here down this is Moore Street. The house that my Uncle Ray used to live in is still standing. Still has some of the bric-a-brac on it that was on it back then. Anyway, it's this kind of tan with white trim house. It was a duplex back when he purchased it or bought it, and He lived on the left-hand side and rented out the right-hand side. And I would come up and carry out his coal ashes. And still looks pretty much the same. Anyway, they had a coal-fired furnace, and it had a thermostat auger system that augered the coal into the furnace, and then they would come down and shake out the ashes, and they would be in buckets. On the weekends, I'd come up and take them out. Anyway, that's where Ray and Sue Reynolds lived. That was my mom's sister, or brother. Back in the old days, Church Street was lined with, particularly in this section, lined with a lot of beer joints, I guess you might want to call them, or could call them. And I would walk past here on my way home from going downtown. There still are quite a few beer establishments here. This little gas station is the same as it was back then, only it appears that they have adjusted the colors on it some. They don't have any pumps there anymore. This building has been there. It's always been a paint store or something of that nature. At least I think that's the building. There was one similar to that right there. Anyway, it's always a paint store. This is Davis Street. And this is the street I would walk down to go home from having been over town shopping or whatever, paying for the newspaper for the week, newspapers. This building over there that has going out of business on it. I remember it as being like a farm implement place at that time. This building with the kind of green mansard roof was A&W Root Beer, and they would had girls that would come out and wait on your car and bring it out. They were always on roller skates. Anyway, it's not an A&W anymore. So looks like there's a lot of burrito and Mexican places here. So looking back the other way, I'm going to head back to the car and then go over to the north side of town. Just a little building on Sheridan Street. It was the Dr. Lurkey's two brothers, GW and one other one. I don't remember what his initials were. Anyway, they opened this little practice in the late 50s or early 60s. And anyway, the thing about these two guys, they're two doctors, they're osteopaths, they were the doctors in charge of bringing all of us 6 boys into the world. Anyway, they were moms, aunties, and a lot of other people's doctor.
What are you doing?
Just videoing some things that when I was growing up around here. That was Dr. Lurkey's office over there. Yeah.
Oh.
He died probably 35, 40 years ago. That's the recording button. So I'm out here at this was the parking lot for the downtown area. I think they opened this up in the early 50s, early to mid 50s. Anyway, this is where people that would shop downtown came to park their cars. There was a building right here between these two posts, and it was kind of like where the police would come and sit and watch things. And there was also a bicycle rack for kids that would ride their bicycles over. I think it was here that I had a bicycle stolen one time. I eventually got it back. It needed some work afterwards. Anyway, it's the high school up there on the hill. And this new building here, or newer building, is where a bunch of buildings were. It's kind of the warehouse district was kind of backed up to the tracks. These are the east-west railroad tracks from, I don't know, the east coast running out to the west coast. The main railroads came through Ottumwa. I'm not really sure why, but they did. Anyway, there was a lot of industry in Ottumwa as a result. So I'll walk over to the river again. It's the Bridge View Center, and this is the bridge that they're working on. Several years ago, rode across it on my bike during Ragbri, and it seemed like it was disintegrating. And it's probably because the Midwest uses salt on their roads to melt the ice, and maybe the cement was not of the quality needed to resist the salt. So it's been quite a bit of rain throughout the summer, spring and summer. There was some flooding in around some areas along the river, this river as well as others. So there are some pumps right here. I'm assuming it probably pumped water that collected, it didn't get drained off into the river and pumped it over into the river. You can see the walls that were constructed, retaining walls. It was all flood control back then. There used to be a lot of floods in this area. Anyway, they've got a lot of rebar and steel here. So our family never owned a car in the 50s and early 60s. So we really didn't use this parking lot. We always took the bus and took the bus or walked. And really can't see much evidence of the buses running. They may not run here on Saturdays anymore, but they always did back then. Right about where that new building is was where O'Hara's Hardware used to be. And Dad patronized their store, bought glass and nails and screen wire and so forth. There was a little shop, or it was a little stand here that right next to this telephone or street light post, and it was there was a guy that made popcorn and sold soft drinks and to the people that were shopping downtown, and he was partially crippled, one leg and one arm. I think it was on the same side. Anyway, he had a little stand there. I think his name was Jerry. And so he would talk to all the people that would come downtown and sell them popcorn and drinks. His little stand wasn't as popular during the winter as it was in the summer, but I'm pretty sure he was there all year round. There was also a little shack here that they always had to have a guard crossing guy, and he would come out like a flagman or anyway. When a train was coming through, he would come out of his little shack. He would do other things besides. But anyway, he would come out of his shack, and which was located between the rails here. Probably still see the foundation down here. I'll take a look. Yeah. Down there where those cement pilings are in the ground, or on the ground. Anyway, he would come out of there, run up, and he would switch on the lights here, and the arms would come down, and then he would get in the middle and make sure nobody tried to get through. Down there is where the train station is, or was. I'm not sure it's a train station anymore. Anyway, that's passenger service was more popular back then. And so that's where the passenger trains stopped and picked up passengers. This disintegrating track right here was for siding. That's what they called it. It's where rail cars would be sighted off the main track and then delivered throughout the town to customers that were getting large orders in train cars, box cars. This was, all of these newer buildings were built in the 1980s. They tore everything down, kind of typical of, at least what I thought was typical of Ottumwa, to tear things down and try to build new and make it look all shiny and nice. Anyway, they started tearing stuff down, and the malls, or mini malls, became popular, as they did in other towns. And the downtown areas didn't really know how to combat that, and as a result, all of their plans for building these new buildings were not, and most of the businesses that went into them went out of business quickly. So I'm just kind of panning around here down where those electrical wires are the kind of a substation down there. That was the substation for the power plant that my dad worked at. And it is obviously torn down. There was a big smokestack next to it that in the really early years used to bellow a lot of smoke, but as things environmentalists came around, they kind of made them use hard coal instead of the softer versions, and also other kinds of environmental things, and most of the smoke disappeared. Just kind of went to steam. Anyway, I'm going to go back to my car and repark again. Okay, I came across the river, or came across the railroad tracks, and now I'm just going to walk, kind of take the path that I took about 22 or 23 years ago. Anyway, this was where O'Hara Hardware was, and there was some other buildings in this area, and they were just warehouses. This building was Kresge's. The upper portion of it was how the lower portion used to look like. There was some windows. Of course, there was the typical store windows. This is the alleyway that went between the backs of the stores and the storage buildings or warehouse buildings. This was a drugstore, and right about 56 or 7, there was a fire. It was the Rexall drug store. It was a fire, and it burned all the buildings in this corner. There was a shoe store and a men's clothing store. The men's clothing store wasn't really burned that badly. It suffered a lot of smoke inhalation, but they decided to tear it down anyway. And so I'm just going to walk down the street here. It was a little wider then. There was this was retained as a drugstore, but changed the name. So these buildings were all retail stores. They have really changed a lot. This was a little wider, so people could get up and down the streets easily. Down there was the 2 theaters in town. One of them was the Capitol, and I think the other one was the Ottumwa. And both of them were in pretty sad shape. The building with the black and the green stripes in the black, that was Bookins Optical, and they sold glasses. And our family, generally speaking, bought our glasses there. I can't remember. There was another eyeglasses store in town, but there probably was. That was a shoe store, and I bought some shoes there. It was a kind of like Kinney shoes, lower end kind of shoes. They're still leather though, they weren't vinyl like a lot of shoes are now. This is kind of a fabric store. Old style sewing machine in there. There's no people on the streets. Back 50 years ago, or even 45 years ago, 40 years ago, there was still a lot of people shopping. All the shops have moved to the mini malls now, or the malls. There's one major mall now in town. This was Osco Drug, as I recall. No, this next one is Osco Drug. Yeah, the green. Looks like it's either having some remodeling done. Down here, this vacant lot was a no, it's not a vacant lot now. Anyway, it was a store that sold government issue or overstock stuff from the government, like military stuff, military supplies. clothing and stuff that was formerly government stuff. That vacant lot, that was the Bowling Hall Hotel. Many times a fire will start the demolition process. And that little vacant lot over there was a small, very good little restaurant. Kind of a mom and pop, very good quality food. Serviced people in the downtown area. This area starts the area where beer was served. There was a few establishments down here in this block. So one thing that seems to stay on and on. At least these buildings haven't been seriously remodeled, and the appearance of the old days destroyed. Now this name, Myers, seems familiar. There was a Myers that sold appliances and TVs and so forth. So it might be most likely is the same Myers that sold back then. A pan around here. That building was the Montgomery Ward, and trying to figure out where, maybe it was above there, that was where my dad's company had their Ottumwa headquarters, Iowa Southern Utilities. With that building, hadn't been touched much because apparently it wasn't used much back then either. Well, it looks like Myers Appliance is now a storage area. These two buildings down here on the, well, actually three, it looks like, on the end. One of them was a grocery store, and I can't remember what the rest of them were. Anyway, it's one of them is a brewing company now. There's a lot of brewers in the Midwest, and it's kind of like looks like a micro-brew. News Rapids Brewing Company. Anyway, the buildings are back to kind of the way they looked back then, back in the 50s. I noticed on the other side, coming over, that looks like that's a tasting room. This was a street back then that went down to buildings that serviced not only the railroad but electrical company. And this building has been remodeled considerably. And just switch around here. This building on the corner was the bowling alley. Kind of get bearings. That's the high school again. This was what was called the Viaduct. I don't know whether they still do or not. It was always the seal was always painted green. Back in my day, there was the Iowa Southern had one of their buildings down there for the line gang, those trucks and so forth. And that's where I would come to go to work when I worked there in the summertime. One year, and must have been 1967. On down that way, that's would have been West Main. That was the hate to call it what we called it back then, but we called it the Jewish section of town. I don't know if that really was the case or not, but that's what it was known as. A lot of lesser expensive shops back down there. You got more for your money down there. Anyway, this building was the bowling alley. It's been renovated. There was apparently something knocked down in between it and this, so they had this little garden area. Doesn't have to really look all that nice when you're just selling beer to people that are rather inebriated. They're really not concerned with design, they're more concerned with how cheap the beer is. Interesting that that brew company bought the building down there on the end, or buildings. It hopefully can be a signal for things to come, that other enterprising people will start buying up some of these other buildings and returning them to their former glory. Building down there where the flag is, that has been the BPOE, whatever that stands for, I'm not real sure. But it's been there ever since I can remember anything. The building on that far corner it's called the Jubilee something or other Bible Center. Anyway, it was the YMCA. Now all the windows are filled in. But no one ever grew flowers downtown. Because it was just way too much energy or no financial gain. Thinking they're probably trying to make it look pretty so that people will come back down here, but I'm afraid it's going to take more than that. Let's see, this building was Osco Drug, and then they moved to this building. Even in the early 1980s, I remember coming back here for visits, and the downtown area had quite a number of shops still. I think Polling's, the building on this corner here where the stop sign is, they were still here. The building with all the glass there seems to bring back some memories. I just can't place exactly what it was. But in one of these stores, I bought my first expensive watch. They said it was white gold. It turned out to be stainless steel. But stainless steel is better than pot metal. And it was a good watch. I still have it. Still runs. Kind of thinking that it was a paint store and kind of art supplies and so forth. There was a store down here somewhere. It was called Cook's Paint. And the people that ran the store thought that Dad was a relative of the people that owned the place, so they always gave him a discount. I don't think he ever told them that he wasn't a relative. He could have been a shirt-tail relative, but it wasn't anything close. This white building was, I think it was called the Fidelity Savings Bank. I think that's what's still on the pediment up there. Anyway, it was a nice bank inside. It wasn't very big, just long. Back where the plywood is, covering the window, that was a covered area that you could do your banking standing outside. It was kind of a slide-through window thing. A lot of people bank that way. Going into the next block here, there was street lights at all of these corners, and it looks like they have added something new here next to the Fidelity Savings Bank. That was Yonkers, women's clothing store. Was pretty much high end. This was just a wide section of the sidewalk. That was Poling's men's clothing store. Many years ago, there was an old building that I never ever saw anybody ever rent. And it was said to be the first building west of the Mississippi that had cement and stone and rebar construction. I don't know why no one ever rented there. Anyway, this is Market Street, and it's where the Soapbox Derby was run. He started way up the hill there, and then ran all the way down the hill, and the end of it was down by the railroad tracks. They had a bunch of bales of hay or straw to slow the the Soapbox Derby riders down. So the building on the left is new, and the buildings on the right are original. It seems so much smaller now than it did back then. It seems so big. There was a store down here on the end, on the side of the street that I'm walking on. It's the side of the street that our dentist office was on, and it overlooked Bookins Jewelry, which was one of these, like either the Ottumwa Leadership Council or Academy, or anyway, that kind of looks like the Bookins Jewelry store. Anyway, the dentist's office was an upstairs location and overlooked the street. I was always in terror of going to the dentist because he was kind of a Dr. Mengele type of person, that he didn't think you needed much Novocaine for getting a tooth filled, and he used the kind of drills that were belt driven, and of course they would take forever to drill out a very small cavity, and it would always generate a lot of heat and became very painful. Of course, him being the masochist as that he was, he thought we were babies if we had to have any Novocaine. I consider myself a baby until I consider it. When it comes to pain, I'm still a baby. My dentist now wouldn't even think about doing much inside my mouth without first administering some Novocaine. Now all the buildings down here were torn down for the most part too. They were primarily warehouses, and so they were torn down and new buildings built, and they just didn't seem to work out so well. Now there was also a pretty nice restaurant down here. Again, it wasn't like a sit down, it was more like a bar restaurant, small tables for people from the downtown area. You could get some baked goods there too. Just trying to figure out which one of these it was. It was the one of the buildings, or one of the, like the Owl's Nest or Cocktails or whatever back there. Going up towards the Ottumwa Hotel, and that was a building that was in a dire need of repair back when I was in high school, and it just wasn't, it was built early in the 20th century as a nice hotel for Ottumwa, and just over time the smaller hotel motel kind of things just kind of drove them out of business. And about in the late 50s or early 60s, there was a guy that had a insurance business in town. I think his name was Schmidt. Anyway, he bought this building for hardly anything and began restoring it. And it was kind of a nice adventure for him. And he used to come and buy groceries from the small grocery store in our general area, and I think it was because he sold insurance to the people that Herb and Ann Stufflebeam, that owned the local area grocery store. Anyway, it has been restored and pretty much back to its former glory. One of its probably hindrances is that there is somewhat of a shortage of parking. But when I was making arrangements to come back here and visit for my high school reunion, this hotel was all sold out, so they must be doing something right. So I'm going to walk back down the alleyway here towards what everybody called the Canteen. It's called the Canteen, but when I was growing up, I never did go here. The alleyway was pretty dark and foreboding, at least I thought so. Lots of overhead electrical wires and so forth, and I just thought it was a dive, basically. You know, everybody in my high school class, or lots of them anyway, seemed to think it was the place to go. But it survived a lot of efforts to get them to move and demolition and so forth. This parking thing here was done a few years ago, and I think they were trying to talk them into moving at the time this was being built, but they didn't, so they just built over top of them. I really question the economics of spending so much money on a parking thing, unless this was done for the hotel. It wouldn't have much reason to exist except for the hotel across the street, that hotel, Ottumwa Hotel. There's no reason for it to exist for the downtown area. The building down there called the Rena Center was J.C. Penney's, and they had a small store which was just took up the part where it says Rent-A-Center, and in the late to middle 50s, middle to late 50s, they bought up all of the other buildings in that block and remodeled and made a nice store. It's where I shopped for clothes for the most part in high school and even after for a little while. It appears that it has been remodeled a little bit. They took all of the kind of ochre colors off of the facade down to where the stop sign is. Where those cars are parked, was another pretty nice restaurant for the downtown area. Served pretty good food. Made pretty good malt, and their French fries were pretty good too. Anyway, you kind of took 3 or 4 or 5 steps down into it. It was about halfway down. It was below street level a little bit. This is the Hoffman Building. The Hoffman Building apparently has been turned into condos or rentals or something. Hoffman Building was they used that rented out to businesses like lawyers and dentists and so forth. Kind of vaguely remember going to a dentist or somebody there, a doctor or somebody there one time. Anyway, where KTVO is located here, there were several small businesses along here. One was the camera shop, which was just on the alleyway here. The telegraph office was somewhere in between. Of course, telegraphs are pretty arcane anymore. Hoffman Building had it was all windows all the way around. Of course, this is where the buses came. And there's probably 3 or 4 buses here that would, or maybe more, that would stack up here to down to where the camera shop was. So if you missed the bus up on the, as they made the turn up after they came off the viaduct, you could run down here and catch it. Now this is interesting. Bailey's Office Supply. They were in business back when I was in high school. Pretty much thinking they were in that particular spot. But they could have been closer to the corner. There was a rather ornate building there which served as the Social Security office. So it may have been taken over by Bailey's at some point. It looks like Bailey's has 3 office fronts now. There's still a lot of buildings in this downtown area that have the architecture to make this area look nice again. If they could bring the right kinds of businesses here to generate income that would be healthy for the area. I think there was a restaurant in that decorative building, kind of light decorative building. There's a fire station next to the church and a police station. There was Beard's appliance. That's where I started collecting coins. Went into his facility to look at coins and so forth. The little shop on the corner was a bookstore. It was just, you go in there, it would be very overrun with books and trinkets and all the little things you could spend 50 cents to $1 on. Now, KTVO, the building that I just went by a little bit ago, started out in the middle 1950s in that building right there. It's called Town Marketplace now. Anyway, their studio was there, and there was a studio in Kirksville, Missouri. So now it's vintage antiques and special finds. Next to that is the Ottumwa Daily Courier. It's always had that appearance. The newspapers were printed in a press room on the right-hand side. The offices were located on the left-hand side. And my biggest memory is on the day that John F. Kennedy was shot. I remember somewhat in a daze. School was let out early, and I came down the street, And the first window, well, I looked in the window of the newspaper, and they had the daily paper, the daily headlines, papers, scotch taped to the window. And it was a story about what had happened in Dallas. There was a building next to the Courier, sandwiched in between that was the YMCA, and it still has the YMCA stone there above the door. Anyway, there was a nice building in between, assuming it might have had a fire or something and had to be torn down. Going to continue on down this street, I'll go up to where the bus stop was. This building, this storefront was always, at least as I recall, it was always had something to do with formal wear, or, and it still is. It's just kind of unique stuff. Now, this particular stretch of storefronts, the buildings have, owners have not seen it necessary to trash them up every so often with remodels. In this town, they have a tendency to put the remodel in charge of somebody that doesn't know a whole lot about design, so they don't go back to try to make it look like it was in the built in the beginning.
Yeah, can't put much in there obviously with the vibration under the bottle of water with the lid on it.
Now, that little building over there was always had something to do with automotive. It sold gas there and did car repairs and things of that nature. This is Green Street. Seems odd that they don't have any streetlights here anymore. Green Street ran down past the Hoffmann Hotel, and I think at one time there was even a bridge across, but may be mistaken. This parking lot was there when I was growing up. There was an effort back then to get the people that owned the businesses to fix up the back of their store, but those wishes always went on deaf ears. This building coming up here was always had something to do with storage or auto shop in there. It just didn't ever seem like there was anything that's lasted very long. The building that's next to it, which is looks like it's a Mexican nightclub. Sears Roebuck, I think, had this building, and it was kind of like a catalog. You'd go in there and you could buy stuff off the floor, but they didn't have that much. It was mostly catalog stuff. You can have to look back the other way. So all the teeny boppers when I was in high school would be running down the hill here to catch the bus after school. And there was somewhat of a dress code back then. And girls generally wore skirts and boys generally wore some form of a dress pant. It was I don't think it was acceptable to wear jeans to high school at that time. I think you got sent home. Jeans was always made people think that maybe you were some kind of a motorcycle hoodlum. There was a church on this corner right here. And like everything else, there was also a couple of houses too, next to it, between it and the Wesley United Methodist Church. It's probably either fell in disrepair or had a fire or something of that nature. That going up towards the high school, I always got off the bus here at this corner, and I was always in a rush to get to class. But there were 3 or so nursing homes going up the hill. There was also a nursing home which was decades ago. There was a hospital across from the high school. It was torn down as well. So we walk back to the car.
Rock, that's right. Only if you're a junior.
Yes, right. That was the only one I chose.
There's an old folks home there in that corner. It was a street that came right through here. And there's an exit where like that up there, out the side of the building. This is original. It's the only one that's still here that was there. As I recall, there was maybe a couple of retirement homes. I always got off the bus right down there over that building that has the kind of tan with red trimmed bricks in there. The building across the street from it was bus depot for Trailways and some other like rehab. So the downtown area was on down towards where the blonde building is. It's called the Hoffman Building. This is a church. Mostly Methodist, I think. Anyway, it was a favorite for the art class to come out and draw different little things on it. Doorways and spires and so forth. On 2nd Street in front of the parking garage, or where the canteen lunch is. High school is up there on the building, up on the hill. It's about 1, 2, 3. I'm at the end of the 4th block from this high school. Again, the Bailey's office supply place was running, or they were in business when I was in high school. This is the Ottumwa Hotel. Tom chap, and I remember that just runs in my mind. I don't remember why, but it just sounds very familiar. That building over there is there was a drugstore on the corner, and there was a grocery store. Old downtown grocery store. Don't know if the building is still there or not. I don't think it is. And I think I've got my streets right. Maybe it was the next street down. Anyway, the story is, at least the one I remember, that Dale, who was married to Nancy, worked at that store when they were very young. I don't think they were married yet, and Dale had a car that he used to make deliveries, and it was quite the unconventional car. It sounded more like a 1920s race car to me, but it just didn't sound like it was. Well, he was rather young at the time anyway, so I'm figuring he probably bought a car that was in some need of repair, and it didn't sound like it had fenders or anything like that. But anyway, so this is looking up, is the courthouse up there on the hill, kind of the hill. And there's Ottumwa Park, I don't know whether it's called that or not. Where that kind of bandstand is. was where I first remembered the horse watering trough being located. And there was a drive around that went up around in this little park. It's a little sitting park. It's not a park where you would necessarily bring food, but they do have a park bench or two. This is 3rd Street. They don't have too many signs. It's a luxury they maybe don't afford. Partially maybe because there aren't that many people in the downtown area that need signage that much. But this is 3rd Street, and across this was the post office. And we used to take music lessons at a place right along in here somewhere. It was called Sheridan Music Company. And we'd come over here on a Saturday to take music lessons, and as I recall, they cost about, I don't know, $1. So maybe 50 cents to $1, somewhere along in there. This is looking back down towards the hotel and the downtown area, such as it is. That building right there, avoided the wrecking ball. That may have been the building that Sheridan's was in. The building that's vacant, the lot that's vacant where the cars are parked down there, that was a laundry. And there was the rest of the block here after this building there was typical of the area, typical of the period, that is. The post office has been converted into, I think it's city office spaces, but could be mistaken. So anyway, looking online, I see that they occasionally have bands in the bandstand. The library is interesting. It was built with a grant from steel magnate from Pittsburgh or somewhere out in the eastern states. Carnegie, I think. Anyway, he built a lot of libraries in a lot of cities across the country. It's one of the, I think that might be a Catholic church, I'm not sure. But this is the courthouse, and that's Chief Wapello. There used to be a kind of a bell tower on top of where it says Wapello County Courthouse. There. Anyway, it's supposed to be a replica of Chief Wapello, who the county is named for. I'm gonna try to get in around here so I can actually see the library. It's a nice little park here. But the tower on the courthouse. It was taken down because it was unsound. I don't know why they just didn't repair it, but there was probably a financial reason. I think it was Andrew Carnegie that supplied the money to build a lot of these libraries across the country. There might be a plaque around there somewhere. I think this is a Civil War monument of some sort. It was there when I was very small. The church steeple down there is one of the oldest churches in town. I guess I could circle around and find out more about the library here and then go down there. The cars made a kind of a circular drive. You come down off of the hill past the courthouse and then come into the circular drive around, and then it would come out past in front of the bandstand. There was a different bandstand back then. And it's the hotel where the anniversary, high school anniversary festivities are going on, or will be going on. I'm trying to figure out whether this is Civil War or whether it's First World War. They were still into the First World War. They were still shipping people out by the state that they originated in. Stopped doing that after the First World War because there were too many communities were taking too much of the load from people being killed. now they're pretty much dispersed. It's even pretty hard to go into the military and stay with your brother. I always remember coming to the post office. This is the post office. This is the back side of it. Oh, it's called City Hall now. Anyway, I used to come to the post office with my dad to... It always seemed like coming to the post office was an important affair. He made it seem like it anyway. Anyway, this church I'm coming up to now is one of the oldest in the city. I think I've been in it, but it was probably for a Christmas service way back when I was very, very young. The churches on the north side used to have, or this side of town, used to have special programs that my parents would want to come and see. That is the drive up, or was at one time, the drive up bank for, it was called the Union Bank at the time. There was old Victorian homes lining this street all the way up. At the top of that street was where the soapbox derby started, and usually the parents or uncles and aunts and fathers and mothers and so forth would help the children get their soapbox derby up the top of the hill. Anyway, this is the First Methodist Church. In the old days, they were pretty evangelical. They're not so much anymore. And this is the bank that is called the Union Bank. My dad always came to. This is the parking lot. He always took the bus. He didn't have a car then. This is Market Street. There was a police station and fire station and maybe another thing or two that was right there next to the church. And where Edward Jones is where Baird's, I was going to say automotive, but it was an appliance store. And he sold TVs a lot. TVs became popular in the early to mid to late 50s. By the end of the 50s, most people had some sort of TV, black and white. It looks like the building that Baird's was in has been torn down and replaced. It used to be that businesses in town used to paint signs on their buildings, and there is the remnants on the end of that building of a sign from the, it would have been probably the 20s and 30s. of the 20th century. So this building hasn't really changed much. Still looks like it did back when I was growing up. It was built in the 1950s. I'm just kind of taken with all of these flowers downtown here. Makes me wonder if it gets dry, how they get watered, or who takes care of them, pulls the weeds, etc. The post office, the bank, Union Bank, or was Union. First Methodist Church, United Methodist. There was a restaurant in that building too. You kind of had to keep the people that would come to the downtown area fed. There was a photo shop in here, a place that took photos, family photos. The name of it was Duree. This building was renovated, and I'm not sure what it was. I think it was just office building. Back at the corner where the Hoffman Drugstore building is located. I first heard about the fire of the Hoffman Building probably when I was probably a small child, under 10. My mother seemed to remember it. Anyway, the original building caught fire and burned to the ground. It was a multi-story building too. Anyway, the Hoffman brothers rebuilt, and there was, for a long time, there was inside the store, the downtown, or the downstairs part of it, where the drugstore was and so forth, there was a pretty nice painting of what the fire looked like. So this is probably going to kind of wrap up my tour of the downtown area. I'm going to go move my car now. Looking down towards the Fidelity Savings Bank and Kresge's, and that was the Polling's clothing store, and this was Penny's.